Good morning, Miss Graham.
Thank you. Good morning,
Morning.
Constable Walker. I'd like to correct something, first of all, that I said yesterday, to see if it makes any difference to you. I said that the first thing that was said by PC Payton contained some bad language, but I've reviewed the perk statement given by PC Payton, and he said, or shouted loudly, "Get down on the ground," and then said, "Get down on the fucking ground." So to suggest that the first thing he said included some bad language wasn't correct on my part. And it appears that the first thing he said was, "Get down on the ground," and then later said, "Get down on the fucking ground."
Yeah.
Does that actually make any difference to what you said yesterday? You said that some phrases trip off the tongue and...
Yeah, like I said, when you're doing the fend-off position, it is the standard is get back, stay back, whatever. Or, people have the things that they say. So yeah, it probably makes no sense the fact that he said it first, and when he's not been following that command, he's then said it a bit more forcefully.
Thank you.
With different
Thanks
language.
very much. I'd like to go back to what we were discussing yesterday. We'd got to the stage where you had told us you were at the side of your van, at the driver's side, and you looked to your right and you saw Nicole Short running away and Sheikh chasing her.
Yes.
And we were coming on to that stage. What I'd like to begin with is to, first of all, just simply play the footage again from the CCTV. Let us remind ourselves what we could see on that. Mm-hmm. You'll also remember there'll be a reconstruction tile on that screen, and I think Miss Wildgoose or Miss Drury will be bringing that up now. And if we could just pause that for a second, you'll see, just to remind you, the real time there is 7:20:24. Your van has just arrived in Hayfield Road. You can see the lights coming round there.
Yep. We
see it on the reconstruction tile, or we've had a discussion about the position of that van. And what I'd like to do now is we will play that, but just to remind you personally, you have your inquiry statement in front of you. And yesterday when we got to this stage, we were looking at paragraph 47.
Yep.
So you can have that in front of you as well. And then for anyone else, there is the spreadsheet that they can follow, which details what we see on the footage. So are you quite comfortable that you've got everything you might need?
Yes.
Thank you. So I think we'll play that footage, please, Miss Drury.
Assessment yourself and feedback to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel.
Control to Bravo, do we have a description? I missed it. It's described as male, black, well-built, 6 foot tall, wearing a white t-shirt, dark coloured jeans and carrying a very large knife.
Commander 4, control, keep off us. Somebody activated the emergency button.
Officer Vanguard, easy shot, male.
Thank you. We'll pause that there. I'd like to ask you about the series of events and maybe break that down. Mm-hmm. Would you like to see that footage again before we go back through it? Thank you. So we can see that if we go back, please, to 7:20 and 46, or round about there, please.
Dark coloured jeans and carrying a very large knife.
Thank you. That's fine, thank you. So at 7:20:46, there seems to be a person who's standing at the rear of the larger van, your van, who moves and walks back towards or behind the smaller police van in the direction of the roundabout at Henry Road. Mm-hmm. So this is before the airwaves message about officer injured.
Yep.
You told us yesterday you were at one point behind your van on the driver's side with you closest to Henry Road and PC Payton to your left.
Yes.
No, it's fine. I was confused yesterday as well. So at this stage, you look to your right, and we have PC Short and Sheku Bio on the road. By that stage, has PC Peyton pressed his emergency button?
I would be unaware of that.
You didn't feel your phone vibrating?
No.
So you're not able to help us when or where PC Peyton was when he pressed the button?
No.
All right, thank you. When you are looking to your right, would you be able to assist us by explaining where on Hayfield Road Nicole Short was, PC Short and Sheku Bio were?
Running from, let's say, the back of the van towards Henry Road, but making their way also towards the south side of Hayfield Road. And by the point I seen them, or certainly by the point where I seen PC Short looking like she was falling, I would say that they were close to the centre lines in the middle of the roadway.
And when you mention the van, you mean your van?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And when, just to get an idea of the timescale, when PC Peyton made that transmission officer injured, where were you at that moment?
Which point did he make that?
Would you like to look at the spreadsheet? So he says that 7:21:02, it's on page 4. Did you hear it on the footage?
7:21.
Page 4 of the spreadsheet. 7:21:02, PC Alan Peyton, officers injured, PC Short, male.
Where was I at that point?
Yes. Do you remember?
I mean, that would have been after the event, so that's
Yeah.
probably when I'm on the ground with Mr.
So by
Bayou
the-
trying to affect the rest at that point.
By that moment, you're actually involved in what's going on rather than...
Yes, because there's, I would say so, because there's nobody that, I mean, as soon as the injury happened, was when I
You
was
got
making my
involved.
way towards to take him to the ground.
All right, thank you, that's helpful. Can we look just briefly at paragraph 47 before I go on to the other images, please? And that's your statement on the screen, and we're going to look at paragraph 47. Thank you. So here you say you turned back to PC Peyton briefly, and you said yesterday you wanted to correct that to say PC Short.
Yes.
You turned back to PC Short briefly as she was in mid-fall and obtained PC Peyton's baton from him. I turned back towards PC Short. By this time, PC Short was lying face down in the prone position on the road close to the south pavement. Sheku Bio was on the opposite side of PC Short to me, standing at right angles to her and facing towards me. I had a clear and unobstructed view of him and saw him with his right leg in a high raised position. He had his arms raised up at right angles to his body and brought his right foot down in a full force stamp down onto her lower back, the kidney area. So I'd like to ask you some questions about this paragraph.
Yep.
The prone position is on her front.
Yes.
And she was close to the south pavement, so that's the other side of the road from on Hayfield Road.
Yes, from here we
From
stopped,
where
yes.
you were. When you say she was prone, can you describe what position she was in? Was she flat out or was she in a different position?
Flat out, as though somebody had fallen and
Right.
went other line.
And you're pushing your arms towards you. Were her arms in front of her? Or was that you?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, as somebody's fallen, put their hands down and just sort of lying sort of flat on the road was how she was flat in the
And
front.
where were her arms when she was flat out on the road?
Not sure.
And I wonder if we can maybe be easier if we get an image on the screen at this stage. So we have some images maybe from the 2B set, 16, 17, 18. I'm going to show you, these are some of the images we looked at yesterday, but different ones. Right. So this is 16, and then can we look at 17, please? And that's looking from the roundabout up Hayfield Road.
Yes.
And then 18, please. And that's an image of the island in Hayfield Road near to the roundabout. We go back to 16, please. Would you be happy to use this image to explain where you saw, or would it be easier for you to use one that we used yesterday where your van is positioned?
No, I think that's a better
Is this
bird's eye view. Yeah.
Is this better for you? Right. So could you explain to us, please, where you saw PC Short falling to the ground?
Somewhere in the region of here. Well, that's where I seen her sort of getting pushed, and then she'd be down. The time she landed, probably close to about there.
All right. And so that's on Hayfield Road, to the west of the roundabout with Henry Road. No, to the east.
To the
it
east,
would have
yeah, we're
been,
upside down
yes.
now.
Yeah, we're upside down now. To the east of the roundabout, and opposite what appears to be a reasonably small grey car, or silver. And her head, where was her head?
She would be head towards the houses.
Head towards the houses, legs towards the trees
trees.
and the grass. And where was Shekubayo?
Standing on that side of her, just
So
right behind her.
He was right behind her, nearer to the roundabout.
Yes.
And right behind her, how close would you say he was?
Alex standing alongside her.
Right side. What direction was he facing in?
Back towards me.
Towards you at the van?
Yes.
And were you still sort of crouched at the van at that time?
No, I was standing.
You'd stood up by this time?
Yes.
We'll remain with this image on the screen, but just to go back to the paragraph in your statement. You've said that Shekubayo was standing at right angles to her and facing towards me. I had a clear and unobstructed view of him. What was the distance between you at the van, standing at the van, and Shekubayo?
I think at that point it was 100 feet, I think I put in my original statement. And I actually think I checked on Google Maps at the time, so it was about 100 feet away.
Right. And you saw him with his right leg in a high raised position.
Yes.
And you've said he had his arms raised up at right angles to his body and brought his foot down. I'd like to, before I ask you, I'm going to ask you to demonstrate that for us, like yesterday.
Yeah.
But before I do that, can I ask you to look at a vest? You've said that the stamp was to the lower back of PC Short, and it was in her kidney area. And I wonder if you can maybe show on the vest, which is a police, it's body armour with a high visibility vest over it. And we may hear that that's actually what she was wearing.
Right, okay.
Not the actual one, but that's the
Right,
same
okay.
as the one she was wearing. Can you explain to me, you said lower back, kidney area, can you show us what area you're talking about?
That would be in the vicinity here.
Right. Could you hold that vest up so we can see it?
Yeah,
So that area, down at the bottom,
Yes.
beneath the police logo. Thank you.
Yeah, so
Please, that area. Thank you. So that's on what would have been her right-hand side.
yes.
Thank you. Now, could I ask you to come out again? Now, I must say, there's no audio in that area because the microphone's on your desk. So I'll ask you to do things, but you don't have to reply because we won't be able to record that.
Right, no worries.
So if you would mind coming out and standing at the plastic tape as you did yesterday, and remember the recording's up there. And so if you could stand, and first of all, I'd like you to demonstrate how he had his arms raised up at right angles to his body. Up like that. So bent at the elbows. And if you could now demonstrate his right leg in a high raised position. Thank you. And then he brought his right foot down in a full force stamp. And I'd like you to demonstrate the force that he used, if you can. Thank you very much. Would you return to your seat and I'll ask you some questions. You've said it was a full force stamp. Was it one stamp that you saw?
Yes.
Thank you. Right, we're looking at the image here. As you were watching the events take place in Halefield Road with Miss PC Short, what was, where was PC Tomlinson?
I've no idea where he was, but he arrived at Mr. Bayou from the trees direction. My focus was on Mr. Bayou, and I'm just aware of PC Tomlinson coming in from my right-hand side and engaging with Mr. Bayou at that point.
And when you say the trees, could you point out the area you mean?
Yeah, the trees still be down here. He came in from that side. I'm not even saying he came from the tree area, but he just came in to my vision from the right-hand side.
And talking about your vision, you'd said yesterday you'd had some droplets of Pava spray in your eyes. And how were your eyes feeling at this point?
They were totally clear by that point. Because it was only 2 or 3 little drops that was enough for me to react to it, but I know enough to incapacitate me for a great deal of time.
So by the time you watched this, your eyes were functioning?
Yes.
I'd like you to tell us what you saw when PC Tomlinson came from the tree area.
He engaged with the male, went in close, and Mr. Bayou turned his attention towards him, and there appeared to be some altercation between the two of them. I couldn't see exactly what was going on, but that both their arms were in the air and there was exchanges.
So when you say engaged, is that what you mean? Their arms were in the air?
Yes, they were. I'm not going to say fighting with each other, but they were in an exchange of some sort, pushing, shoving, striking, whatever. I'm not 100% sure. It was just arms I was aware of.
Did Sheku Bio move from the position that you've got indicated there around the number 2 circle?
I believe he might have done. He might have started making his way back or stepping back from PC Tomlinson towards the houses.
Right. And when he moved back, what distance was he from you?
By that point, I was starting to run towards him. So I was making my way towards him at this point, watching what was going on.
When PC Tomlinson engaged with Sheku Bio on Hayfield Road, what direction was he facing in at that stage?
When who was facing, sorry?
Well, what direction was Sheku Bio facing when PC Tomlinson came out from the tree area? Did Sheku Bio turn?
His attention at that point was on PC Short, and as soon as PC Tomlinson sort of engaged with him, he turned and faced. So he would be facing towards the trees at number 3, and PC Tomlinson's facing towards the houses, and they were face to face with each other.
So they were face to face with each
Yes.
other. And you didn't see exactly what happened there at that point. Tell us what you did when you realised that PC Tomlinson and Sheku Bayo had engaged in some way.
Well, by that point I was already, like I say, I take PC Payton's baton from him, and I'd already started to run towards where they were, with the intention of restraining him and getting involved in the restraint. And I made a couple of decisions whilst I was running along there, that eventually resulted in me shoulder charging Mr. Bayo to the ground.
What were the decisions you were making?
Initially, because I'd witnessed the stamp and I had Alan Payton's baton, I was going to go on a heavy baton strike, but I opted against that as I got closer, just because PC Tomlinson was nearby, and I just decided that the baton wasn't the best option, and that to get him on the ground to get some sort of control over him would have been the best option. So I dropped the baton and proceeded with the shoulder charge.
What was your concern if you used the baton when Sheku Bayo and PC Tomlinson were engaged?
There's obviously the risk of hitting PC Tomlinson because he was on his right-hand side and I'm right-handed, so the baton strike would have come in on the side that PC Tomlinson was on. And just to say in general, I wasn't convinced if the baton would make any difference, given the fact that the path and that hadn't worked at that point. And I mean, personally, this is my personal choice. Getting somebody onto the ground and getting handcuffs is better than trying to have a stand-up fight with batons. It's, the ultimate goal in officer safety is to get somebody to the ground and get handcuffs on them, if they're being violent.
Can I ask you to look for a moment? We'll come back to this footage, but can we look for the moment again at your statement, paragraph 51? So you say you, we'll get this on the screen. Thank you. Towards the end of that paragraph, you say, I made the instantaneous decision to discard the baton and take Mr. Bayo to the ground by bodily force. Now, in your self-penned statement that you handed to PERC, that's the PERC 00265. Can we look at that for a moment? Page 4. Paragraph 3. This is the statement that you handed to PERC on the 4th of June, 2015. And it's paragraph 3. Now, again, we don't see a very clear division between the paragraphs, but actually I wanted to, I'll read out the section that I'm interested in. I therefore decided not to strike with the baton and have instead continued running at the male and charged him, striking his chest area with my forearms. This caused the male to fall to the ground backwards. I failed at this time, landing to the side of the male, dropping the baton. I immediately reached over the male in an attempt to gain control of him. So you can see that sort of 2/3 of the way down the page, or maybe 3/4, you'll see at the end it says, continued running at the male and charged him, striking his chest area with my forearms. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then can we look at PERC 264, please? So this is the actual statement that you gave to PERC on the 4th of June 2015. And we're looking at page 7, please. And paragraph 2. And there you say in line 3, I just brought my left arm across my body and shoulder charged him with my left shoulder with a fair bit of force. So in front of the chair we have your descriptions of this, and it's you took him to the ground by bodily force, you charged him, striking his chest area with your forearms, and you shoulder charged him with his left shoulder. And I just wondered if you could maybe demonstrate to the chair what you actually did, because I'm wondering about charging him to his chest area with your forearms and shoulder charging. They sound slightly different.
Basically, running towards him, I just dropped my arm down and went
Oh,
through
I
him,
see.
like
Right.
to take him to the ground,
Could you
just to continue the momentum.
Could you stand up and just show the chair what you're doing with your arm there?
Yeah, so just running towards him, just dropped the shoulder.
Right. So you're pulling your right arm across your own chest,
Yes, to go on
and then
shoulder first.
leading with your right shoulder.
Yes.
Thank you. When you did that, what part of Shekubayo's body did you connect with your right shoulder?
It'd be his right side upper torso. As I was running towards him, I was aware that PC short was on the ground, so I could remember just before contacting me, Mr. Bayou had actually jumped up, so I was off the ground as I made contact with him, and obviously just as a natural reaction before I hit him, I closed my eyes. So I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, it's been the upper part of his body with my shoulder.
So when you started running towards PC Tomlinson and Shekubayo, where was Nicole Short at that point? Did she remain on the ground?
Yeah, she was at his feet at that point.
She was still on the ground.
Yes.
When you made contact with your right shoulder, where was she?
She was off to that side, my right side, because like I say, Mr. Bayou and PC Tomlinson had started to move towards the other side, but I don't know if there was movement there or whatever, but something just gave me the urge, the instinct to jump to clear something that was in my way, and I was off the ground at the point when I made contact with Mr. Bayou.
You were both feet off the ground
Yes.
at that point. Did you, when you say you jumped, did you jump over PC Short?
I'm not sure.
Right.
I'm not sure.
When you were approaching Shekubayo and PC Tomlinson, were you trying to avoid PC Short, who was on the ground?
I was aware of the fact that I wasn't going to be running over her, but like I said, unless there was some sort of movement, but yeah, something gave me the instinct to avoid whatever was on the ground. I really didn't know what it was at that point.
And immediately before you made contact with your right shoulder, Shekubayo and PC Tomlinson had been face to face.
Yes.
And having made contact, I think you said in your inquiry statement that he fell on his back.
Yes.
Was that flat on his back?
Yes.
And can we go back to the image that we were looking at a moment ago, if that's possible? And you've told us where PC Short and PC Thompson and Shekubayo were. After you made contact with your right shoulder, can you point to the area where Shekubayo fell onto the ground?
Yeah, I think he landed somewhere about there. Roughly.
So did he land on the roadway or on the pavement, or was he straddling both?
He was straddling both, but it's a lowered curb at that point.
So it's quite flat to
Yes,
the ground.
aye.
Where was PC Tomlinson?
Behind me, probably still standing where he was when he was engaging with Mr. Bayou. I've no idea.
Okay. And you've said in paragraph, we'll just remain at the image, but in paragraph 53 of your inquiry statement, you say, after tackling Mr. Bayou to the ground, you landed on the pavement next to him. I was on my knees while he was on his back, and I made an attempt to get over the top of his shoulders and hands to get him under my control. Could you explain that manoeuvre to the chair, please?
Yeah, basically, so Mr. Buy's on his back. To reach across, the whole point was to try and reach across, get a hold of his hands and just pin them down. And then from that point, get cuffs on him.
Is that pinning him down to his chest?
Just any way possible, just to get a hold of both his arms, so that we could arrest him. At that point, it was just there was no plan to it. At that point, it was just a case of get a hold of his arms and try and get him handcuffed.
And where were his arms when he landed on his back?
By his side.
Both arms down by his sides.
Yeah.
And were you able to secure his arms?
When I went to grab a hold of him, that's when we started. There was an exchange of punches on the ground. He started to lash out and punch towards me. And then there's been I threw a couple of punches back again. I managed to get a hold of one arm, and it was an ongoing situation for there, just trying to get him under enough control to get handcuffs on him.
Okay. You've said in your statement you were on your knees.
Yes.
Which side of Sheku were you on?
So if he was on his back, I would be on his right side.
You were on his right.
His right.
And where were your knees? Which part of his body were they in close to, or
probably this part.
his sort of
Yeah, lower torso.
lower torso? And what sort of force and pressure were you using at that time in trying to secure his hands or his arms? Were you struggling?
Yeah, I was struggling with him. As I say, I was trying to get a hold of his hands. He was lashing out and he was punching 2 or 3 times at me.
Okay. Where did his punches connect?
I think it was mainly on my stab vest and that.
Is that the
Stab
black
vest, yeah.
body armour type vest that we've seen?
Yeah.
So that to your body.
Yes.
And where did your punches connect?
The 2 punches that I threw was to his face, to his right side, left side of his face.
The left side of his face?
Yes.
Was that with your right hand?
Yes.
And then in your inquiry statement, we'll stay on that picture. You say, he raised his shoulders and tried to punch me with his right hand. As I leant over, I then struck him a couple of times with a clenched fist somewhere around his left cheekbone area, on his face.
Yep.
He continued to struggle and lashed out with his arms and continued to try and punch me again. Do you remember how many times the punches connected with you?
No.
No. The punches I'm describing were not full force punches, rather they were pulled punches delivered tactically in an attempt to make Sheku bring his hands away from his body or side and up to his face. Is that you describing your punches?
My punches, yes.
Right. Can you explain to the chair, when you describe them as pulled punches delivered tactically, what do you mean by that?
Not full force punches, not looking to him hard enough to can break any bones or knock him out or anything like that. It's just it's a tactic that was mentioned a few years ago in OST, that if you could get somebody, if you could make contact with somebody's face, the automatic reaction is to bring your hands up, and that presents the hands with the wrist area, so you could apply cuffs.
Which is what you're trying to
Which I'm trying to just try to get his hands so I can get him under control.
Yeah. And then you then go and say, this will allow me to apply handcuffs to his wrists, and I used this technique due to the difficulty we were having in applying the cuffs. So at that stage, you've not managed to get the cuffs on Mr.
I've not managed to get his hands, never mind the cuffs.
Yeah. And you say, as Sheku was actively resisting with extreme force and was himself throwing punches at this point, I felt this tactic was a reasonable use of force in the circumstances.
Yes.
And so you feel that the force that you used at this point was reasonable.
Yes. Justifiable and proportionate.
And you feel the shoulder charge and bringing him to the ground at that stage was reasonable.
Yes.
And would you, in terms of the behaviour that you've been describing from Sheku, Is it the stamp in the road that is the most extreme behaviour that you've described?
The fact that the fact that he's chased PC shot in the first place was scary enough. But yeah, the fact that he's then knocked her to the ground and then turned his attention towards her. I've witnessed the stamp, and then when PC Tomlinson's then tried to engage with him, he appears to have then started to resist that officer as well. So yeah, he certainly has shown violent behaviour at that point.
When you were on the ground, on your knees, trying to get Shekobayo's hands, where was PC Tomlinson?
No idea.
Do you know what he was doing at that
No.
stage? No. So is it just you and Shekobayo
Just me,
at that
yeah.
point? And how long was it just the two of you?
It's hard to put timescales on things like that. But the next person who arrived would be PC Payton again. So yeah, I was struggling with his arms for. I really couldn't put a time on it.
So the next person you're aware of is actually PC Payton.
Yes.
You weren't aware of PC Tomlinson at that stage?
No.
Okay. Now, you've talked about Shekobayo being on his back.
Mm-hmm.
How long did he remain on his back?
And until I managed to get a hold of his right arm. I then moved his right arm across his body and pinned it down against his left arm, so that I had both his hands restrained at that point. And I went from being on his back to on his side.
Would that be his left-hand side?
Yes.
Did you remain on his right?
Yes.
Was he on his front at any time?
He might have been not on his side. Depends what you mean by on his front. This is what we had the discussion about before when I was doing this. He might have been face down, but not on his front. So he's went across from over to here. So he's face down, but he was never fully on his front. His arm was always underneath him.
Right. I wonder if you could demonstrate that for me, please. I appreciate that you'll have to come out and you won't be able to speak, but it may be of assistance. This is important.
Yes.
Thank you. So if you just simply demonstrate what you mean,
So he's been lying on the ground.
just demonstrate, and then I'll get you to speak later when you're at the microphone. All right, so correct me, you're imagining he's on the ground. You've got your right arm pulled over to your left, and your right knee is off the ground,
No, I just be turned around.
turned around. So would the right knee be on the ground, or would the right knee be on the left leg? You don't, yeah. Well, I'll ask you questions, all right. Come back to the microphone, please, and I'll go through that when it can be recorded. So, just so that this can all be recorded, because we don't have audio in that space.
Yep.
You were standing, imagining that your left shoulder was on the ground.
Yes.
And you had your right arm pulled over to your left arm.
Yes.
And I was unclear about the position of the legs at that point. I think this is quite important. So could you describe to me how you were positioning or demonstrating the position of the legs?
I have no idea what position his legs were in. I was, like I say, at the torso, looking up towards his hands. I have no idea where his legs were.
So that's not something you can help us demonstrate?
No, no.
But as far as you were concerned, his shoulders were turned, his right shoulder was off the ground,
Yes.
his left shoulder was on the ground,
Mhm.
and you had his right hand towards his left hand.
Yes, to try and control both of them together on the ground.
But you couldn't see where his legs were or what they were doing.
No, because I wasn't concentrating on that part at the time.
Did you remain on your knees at that point?
Yes, I had my knees tucked in behind his back so he couldn't turn back and break free.
Right. What pressure were you applying to retain his right hand towards his left hand?
Enough to keep them on the ground.
Is it, at any stage, did you lie on Shekubayo?
I think as part of having to reach across him, I had the upper part of my body was on his shoulder.
Right. You're pointing to your right shoulder. Do you mean his right
His
shoulder?
right shoulder, yeah.
So your upper body, what's your upper body, just from the waist up?
Yeah, because I was on my knees at that point and reaching across him.
And that weight was placed on his right shoulder.
Shoulder and his hands, because obviously I'm reaching across to put my hands on his hands, and I'm reaching across him so I could reach that far.
And that was at the point that he was on the ground on his left shoulder, lying, the top half of his body lying to the side.
Yes.
Then in paragraph 54, you say that you managed to take hold of his right wrist, which forced his arm across his body. I put pressure from my chest area onto his right shoulder, pushing him onto his left side. My body was in a crouched position over him, with my knees on the pavement against his back, so he couldn't turn back towards me to lash out. And is that what you've described?
Yes.
So the crouched position, can you come out and demonstrate that crouched position, please? All right, thank you. And if you come back, thank you, and we'll talk it through the microphone. All right.
Might be better if you came further out.
Yeah.
People
Yeah,
can
sorry,
stand.
other people can't see behind the tables.
You can stand if you like to gather round this area, so it's more open. If you just come in front of the desk here.
Thank you. And again, if you come back to the microphone, thank you. So at that stage, you're leaning on your knees on the ground at Shekubayo's back. That's what you were demonstrating. And you're leaning over you put your hands on the ground in front of you
Yes.
as you leaned over. Were your hands on the ground holding on to the hands of Shekubayo?
Yeah, so my hands would be on top of his hands, keeping his hands onto the ground.
And your body was leaning over his upper body.
Yes.
And where were your feet?
At that point, when I'm on my knees, they would be underneath me.
Were they in line with Shekubayo's feet, or were they at an angle?
No, I was reaching across him, so I would be like 90 degrees to his body.
So they'd be at an angle.
Yes.
You will know, Constable, that there are other statements that have been given to the inquiry, and a number of people suggests that Shekubio was on his front and prone. Are you able to explain why there seems to be a difference?
Like I was saying, there's a difference between on his front and prone. I'm not denying the fact that we had him over, so he wasn't flat on his back, but he was never in the prone position because his hand was always underneath him. That's why he ended up handcuffed to the front, because we weren't able to handcuff him to the rear. And again, like I've covered in here, that's the nature of witness statements. Everybody sees a situation differently and will report it differently.
So what's your understanding of prone, just to be clear, so that the chair knows this?
Prone position for me would be, or certainly how it's described as OST, when you've got somebody flat on their front with their hands handcuffed behind them when the full body weight is on the chest and abdomen area.
So someone who would be prone is flat on their front, their arms are at either side, and perhaps handcuffed to the rear.
Yes, I think the definition is for prone is to be flat on your front, and I think if your arms are underneath you, you're not flat
Right.
on the front bit. That's just my understanding.
So your position is he was not prone at any time,
Yes,
because he always had his left arm
underneath him.
underneath him on the ground.
Yes.
Can we go back to the image that we have on the screen? So you've described how you were struggling and trying to secure Mr. Bio's hands. Did you manage to get handcuffs on him at that point?
At one point I managed to get, the next stage that I could remember was I got a cuff on his right arm. And then when I went to try and secure it onto his left hand, he broke free, because obviously I've got to release the pressure to apply the cuffs, and he managed to break free.
Where are your cuffs?
They are the opposite side from my radio.
So
up here.
right shoulder.
Yeah.
How, and you're right-handed.
Yes.
So having removed the cuffs from your shoulder, how did you retain Mr. Bio's hands together?
I must have went down to one hand at one point to be able to remove the cuffs.
Were you still on your own at that stage? Or was PC Payton or
PC Payton was there at that point, when the cuffs were applied, I think.
Where was PC Payton in relation to you? You've
He-
described your position.
Yeah, he was on my left-hand side.
He was on your left.
Yes.
Was he closer to Shekubio's head?
Yes.
And what was he doing?
He was assisting in the restraint. He'd got a baton. I'm not sure if he just picked up his own baton, but when he arrived, he had a baton in his possession, and he passed it through Mr. Bio's left arm, and was trying to assist. And I mean, because let's say initially we were trying to get him handcuffed to the back, so he was trying to assist in getting the hand out from underneath, so we could get both hands to the back to apply handcuffs.
Right. I thought you were holding Mr. Bio's hands to the front.
Yes, over his body.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
But you just said there that you were trying to handcuff him to the back.
Yeah, that was once we had him. We were trying to get these. Once we had his hands under control, we were trying to get his hand out from under him so we could handcuff him to the back.
I see. And when you say his hand out from under him, do you mean his left hand?
His left hand that he was lying on, yeah.
So you were trying to move his left hand out from under him. How were you doing that?
I can't remember if I had the cuff in the right hand at that point or no. But then it was a case of try to pull the arm out from underneath him and get it round to his back.
So you were pulling his left hand out under his body.
Yes. And we couldn't get it.
At that point, was he moved into a prone position?
No, he was still on his side.
How were you going to manage to pull his left hand out from under him to get it to the back without moving him onto a prone position?
Well, if we'd managed to get his arm out from underneath him, then he would have ended up on a prone position. But we need to get the arm out from under him first before we roll him over. because then he would just lie on the arm.
Would it not be easier to move him into a prone position and then have his left arm pulled out from under him?
Now we need to keep control of his arms though as we're doing that. I mean, yes. I mean, what you're suggesting is letting go of his arms and rolling him over, at which point he's got both hands free again to start lashing out and punching.
Well, you've securely caught his right hand, and
I wouldn't say securely caught it,
right.
but yeah.
You've got the handcuffs
I'm stopping. No.
no, you don't have it on, but you've got his right hand. You've
Aye,
got
that's-
both hands together
Yes.
at one point.
Mhm.
And you want to secure his left hand and get it out from under him. Is the easiest way of doing that not just simply rolling him onto his front and bringing the left hand out?
Now rolling him over into his front would result in him landing on top of the arm that we're trying to get out, and we would need to release the grip that we've got on him. So having secured them or got partial control on them, we're not going to let go of that and allow him to strike out.
So how were you going to get the left hand out from under him? Although even though it's at the front, how were you going to move his left arm from his shoulder so that you could get it round behind his back?
But that's where you come in and work as two. So I would keep a hold of his right arm, and PC Payton would take a hold of his left arm, and we would get both arms round the back and get cuffs applied. They take an arm each.
I'm just thinking about my own shoulder. If I was lying on my shoulder on my left, I had my arm out, and I want to move my arm behind my back, I have to move the shoulder and move the arm underneath the left side of my body. So I'm just trying to work out what technique you and PC Payton were going to use that would allow you to move a left hand that's on the ground in front of a person to the back of the person without moving it under that part, the left-hand side of their body. What technique were you using that would allow you to do that without at the same time either lifting the person so that the arm was released and the shoulder released, or pushing them onto their front so that the arm would be released and the shoulder released? Is there a technique that allows you to do that?
I mean, you could just pull somebody's arm out from under them controlled. Aye.
Is that what you did?
That's what we attempted, but we weren't able to do so, and eventually we just thought it safer just to handcuff him to the front.
So you tried to pull his left arm out from under him as he remained lying on his left-hand side.
Yes.
And what technique did PC Payton use to attempt that?
He passed a baton through his arm.
Which arm?
His left arm, his left upper arm.
Right.
And I think he tried to use the baton to try and lever the hand out from underneath him as well.
Is that a recognised technique that you're taught at OST?
Yes.
But that wasn't successful, you said?
No.
Were you able to assist with that technique from your position?
I mean, you're trying to assist, but at the same time trying to keep control. Every situation is different. It's how somebody lies and how they're fighting with you, so you can only do what's in front of you. But yeah, I mean, ultimately we're trying to work together to get him handcuffed to the rear.
But you remained in charge of the right arm at that stage, did you?
Yes, just try to keep anything under control. Yeah.
How long were you trying to do that? Trying to get the left arm out from under him?
Like I say, it's impossible to put timings when in that sort of situation.
Where's PC Tomlinson?
Still no idea.
All right. So you weren't aware of PC Tomlinson at any point up till then?
No.
When did you first realise that PC Tomlinson was there?
Probably once we had him under full restraint, we rolled him over onto his back, and I realised at that point that leg restraints and that had been applied.
So you're still facing the top half of Sheku Bayou. You don't
Yes.
know what's going on behind.
No.
Do you know other people have arrived?
The next person I'm aware of arriving is PC Alan Smith.
So you're not aware of PC Tomlinson at all,
No.
but you're aware of PC Alan Smith arriving.
Yes.
What was he doing?
He's approached the Mr. Bayou from the opposite side of me.
So it would be Mr. Bayou's left-hand side.
Yeah, which is the direction he was facing at that point. And he came across and administered a warning that if Mr. Bayou didn't stop resisting, that he would spray him with CS spray.
What was the warning?
Pretty much what I said, if you don't stop resisting, you will be sprayed.
Did someone reply to that comment?
Yes, I did.
What did you say?
That it doesn't work. And that would just end up, like I said earlier, with CS spray, would just end up contaminating everybody other than Mr. Bayou, so told him not to bother.
What did PC Smith do?
Put his baton away, his baton, his CS spray back in his holder at that point.
And what did he then do after he'd put that away?
Not sure of his exact involvement, what he was involved in. As I say, it happened that quick in quick succession. You know, we got him to the ground, there was a struggle, we tried to get cuffs on, tried to get cuffs to the back, failed, got cuffs to the front, got him under control, and then by that point I realised that the whole station was there and that he had leg restraints on him.
When you got the cuffs on him to the front, was it you that applied both cuffs?
Yes.
And once that happened, you've said you took charge of the situation, you got control of him, did you say? Is that the word you just used?
Yeah, when you've got handcuffs on him, you've got better control of him, yeah.
So what did you do at that point?
Once I was happy that he was cuffed and secured, as I say, that's when I sort of stopped reaching across him onto his hands, sort of sat up and was aware that everybody else was had arrived.
Tell us who was there.
The first person I was really aware of was the DS, Samantha Mann.
Samantha Davidson?
Davidson, yeah.
Where was she?
She was on the roadway at the feet of Mr. Bayou.
Right. Could you point sort of the... I appreciate that the circles are bigger than people
Yeah.
would be in the scene, but when you say on the roadway, where do you mean?
Yeah, so sort of just down there to the feet.
So at number one, would you say that circle would encompass yourself, PC Payton at Sheku Bayou's head, and Sheku Bayou himself?
Yes.
And Samantha Davidson arrived in Hayfield Road and was towards Sheku Bayou's feet.
Mm-hmm.
Who else was there?
That I was aware of, or?
Yeah, you said you became aware the whole station was there.
No, I was just aware of there being vast numbers, or more,
Right.
certainly more people than just me and Alan.
Well, do you remember anyone else being there?
I mean, throughout the course of the whole event, I spoke to DS Davidson and Sergeant Maxwell, and I was aware that DC Connell was also there. But other than that,
Okay.
nobody specific.
What I'd like to do now then is go back to the footage. I'm going to play a slightly later part of the footage, and we'll just watch that through first of all, and then we'll come back to it and I'll ask some questions. So maybe we could start at 7:23, or round about. That's absolutely fine.
If you get sight of the mail,
You'll see. Thank you. That you'll see on the footage now that we've gone back to. This is where your van parks in Hayfield Road.
Yep.
And then we'll take it through to around 7:21:38, please.
to make an initial assessment yourself and feedback to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel.
control to Bravo. Do we have a description? I missed it. It's described as male, black, well-built, 6 foot tall, wearing a white T-shirt, dark coloured jeans and carrying a very large knife.
Commander 4, control, keep off us. Somebody activated the emergency button.
Officer Vanguard, PC shot, male. Control acknowledge, officer injured. What's the locate? We've just got blue lights stopped. Jason Tagala, could you approach him? Thank you. Control.
We'll pause it there for a moment. So looking at that now, and you've got the spreadsheet in front of you, you can see that from the minute your van parks, looking at the timings, it's about 75 seconds or 1 minute 15 seconds before the man is restrained on the ground. And PC Smith has an airwaves transmission about that man skewer. Looking at that timing now, does it make you reflect and looking back think that was all over in 75 seconds? It's not. Do you think that's maybe too short? You didn't spend enough time carrying out your assessment, or you didn't spend enough time trying to communicate with Mr. Bio?
No, I think we covered that quite fully yesterday, that we tried everything, and it was, no.
No, that's fine. Can we carry on playing some of this footage, please? I'd like to continue until we see the Snapchat footage from Ashley Wise's phone.
30 seconds out, 4-1.
It's my fault. If you're alive, you didn't give me an update, please.
I'm just approaching, I'll give you an update.
Right, you'll see on the footage now that we now have Snapchat footage overlaid onto the other footage, and we can see the area of the restraint. Looking at that, are you able to identify who the officers are that we can see?
I could say with certainty who 3 of them are.
Could you tell us then, could you point to who you can see and who you can identify?
That would be PC Alan Smith, PC Alan Payton, and then that's myself lying on the ground.
So you don't know who the officer is who's standing up at the feet?
I can't see him clearly enough now.
And there's an officer beside a lamppost or a light who's standing up on the other side. Do you recognise him?
It's not clear, but I guess I would say it was maybe James McDonough, PC James McDonough, but that's not clear enough to say.
Right. So you see PC Smith at the top. He's number 1.
Yes.
And I think you said he was on the left side, not, was he at the top of the left side?
Yes,
Yeah.
so,
And then PC Payton, was he at you said he was at the head of Shekabio?
yes, when he first arrived. I mean, this is obviously a couple of seconds into the restraint, so there's been some sort of dynamic movement, but yes, just
So
they're still in the same order.
he's moved around.
Possibly, yeah.
And then you said lying on Shekabio at number 3.
Yeah, that's me lying at number 3. I wouldn't say I was lying on him at that point, but
You were lying on him?
no, you said that. I
Sorry.
wouldn't say that.
All right, sorry. But you were there at number 3?
Yes.
Right, can we carry on playing this for a few seconds, please? and then stop it there. So the person who was at the feet, who was standing, has now crouched down towards the feet. Did you recognise him? No.
No.
And the person who was standing, you didn't get any further idea who that was. Can we look, please, at an image that we'll look at, which is number 22, which is in this 2C section of the other images. Now, this is an image that's been prepared by Advanced Laser Imaging. You've not seen this before. It's been prepared from the Ashley Wise Snapchat footage. And you'll see that people are all in different colours. You can see the red, the green, the brown sort of colour.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is that would you be number green? Sorry, colour green.
The dark green, that's just the two legs, or the light green?
You're the dark green. Well, first of all, let's look at the dark blue colour. So this is a person who's crouching at the feet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that person? Do you know who that was?
No, that's the person I couldn't identify.
You can't identify. And is the brown person you thought might be PC McDonough, but you weren't sure?
Yep.
And then there's somebody crouched down, what would be on Shekabayo's left-hand side, that maybe a sort of purple colour. Do you know who that was?
No.
No. And then the red person, do you know who that was?
That's who I would say would be Alan. Wait a minute. If that's taken from the Snapchat footage, then that's when sort of
Yes.
people have moved round a bit. So that
You
would
said
be PC
there'd
Smith, yes.
there'd been some movement.
Yes,
So that's PC Smith is red.
yes.
People haven't been allocated individual colours. It's just so that you think that's PC Smith. So he's on his knees, sort of crouched down at the there, and then the green, lighter green colour, someone kneeling. Who was that?
Alan Payton.
PC Payton. And then you've correctly identified, there's dark green legs. And you said you were lying on the ground. I think that's what it says on the transcript.
Yeah.
So which ones are your legs?
I think it's impossible to tell. I think the imaging people said that as well. That there wasn't enough.
They said
detail
they
to work
couldn't
it out.
tell.
Yeah.
But can you tell?
From the way that I would be lying, it would have to be the legs, I'm guessing.
The ones closer to me.
Yeah.
And the further away legs, closer to Hayfield roundabout, the roundabout at Henry Road, they would be Shekubayo's legs.
Yes.
Right. So the closer legs are yours, and the further away legs, looking at it, would be Shekubayo's.
Yeah.
Thanks. Can we have a look at, please, at some enhanced footage from the Snapchat? It's SBPI 110. And this is a short clip of footage. You'll see it twice. So the first time you see it, it will be the Ashley Wise Snapchat footage that you saw layered over on the real time clock. Mm-hmm. We'll watch through that, and then you'll watch it again, and this time it'll be, the second time it's 400% bigger, so it's been zoomed, and the speed is 25% slower.
Right.
And we can watch this more than once if that's easier, but let's watch it through once entirely, and then we'll see where we get to. Thanks. Right, I appreciate that's the first time you've been able to see that, so I think it might be useful to go through it again, just to let you see it a second time. You'll see it's a short passage, so let's watch that again. The first one, as I say, you'll see, is the Snapchat footage extracted from the combined. Right, can we go back to the beginning, please? And we'll pause it during the first section, if that's all right. Right. Where were you?
It's highlighted. Yeah.
You're lying on the ground,
Yes.
you said. Where's your head?
Somewhere behind PC Payton.
That's PC Payton, who was
Yeah.
there. He was the lighter green coloured person. So he's got his back to us here in this footage.
Yes.
And your head's near him. What position were you in at this stage?
I can't recall. It'd be midway through the struggle. Can't recall.
And you were in a lying position, you said.
From there, yes.
Yeah. Where are your feet?
Down by the pavement, down here.
Yeah. And can we then move on to the next section, please? Those red circles can be removed, please. And when we come on to the next image, I'm going to pause it there, please. So you can see there that there are separate feet. Do you want me to rewind it? But when I say myself, Miss Drury. Do you want Miss Drury to rewind it? Can you see this, that there's separate feet there, visible on the footage? And I would like you to keep focusing on the feet. Do you see that the furthest away foot appears to be pointing down, toe down?
What do you mean by furthest away?
the one that's on the road, furthest away from me. There's one towards, closer to me, and there's one furthest away from me. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Right. If you can keep focusing there. And we'll play a couple of seconds just so you can watch it. And stop, please. Did you see that toes appeared to be pointing downward toward the roadway or the pavement?
The feet that are moving.
Do you want to see it again?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you may not agree with me. You may not be able to see this, PC Walker. So.
No, I think they're my feet that are moving.
Well, I was going to ask you.
Yes, I think they're mine. Yeah.
Right. So can we rewind that slightly, Miss Drury, please, and we'll look at it again. And keep going. Right, pause it. So did you see the feet moving?
Yes.
And did you see at least one foot was pointing down, toes pointing down to the roadway?
Mm-hmm.
Whose were they?
I would have to say that they were my feet that were moving about at that point.
So your feet were actually pointing down towards the roadway?
Yeah, probably try to get some traction on the ground because I went for a kneeling position to let as though my feet have slipped out from underneath me.
So you've got moved from a kneeling position to a lying position.
Yeah.
And then I'd like you to watch, see the gentleman, the officer who's at the feet area, he's leaning down as we've paused this.
Yes.
I want you to watch what he does to the leg that he is touching. So we'll watch this a couple of times. Did you see him lifting that there?
Yep.
And we'll watch that again. Do you see him lifting that leg up? Do you want to see it again?
No, I could see it.
Yeah. So he's lifting that leg upward.
Mm-hmm.
The knee's on the ground, and he's lifting the leg. He's bending the leg at the knee on the ground, lifting it up. Is that Sheku Bayo's leg?
It would. I'm assuming so. Yes, it would need to be.
Nobody lifted your leg up in that position. So at some point, an officer in the area of Sheku Bayo's feet has bent his leg at the knee being on the ground, and he's bent it up the way.
Yes.
Right. So at that point at least, Sheku Bayo's knee is on the ground, flat on the ground.
Yes.
So he's not on his left-hand side at that stage.
His shoulders could be.
So you think his knee is on the is on the ground at the time that his shoulders are only on the left-hand side.
That's possible. It's not clear to see for there, but it's certainly possible, yeah.
So is that a twisting position that you're imagining between his shoulders, right shoulder up in the air?
Yeah.
It's on his left-hand side, but his knees are face down.
Yeah, he's twisted round at
onto
the
the
hips,
ground.
so his feet are...
So his knees are face down on the ground, but his right shoulder is up.
That's how I could assume that's happened. I can't speak to that being how it has happened, but yeah, that's
Okay.
certainly a possibility for him to be on his side and for his knees to be bent upwards.
Right, thank you. Now, what I'd like to do, yesterday you were very helpful. We went through the images and you put yourself in different positions. And what we would like to do now is Mr. De Giovanni from Advanced Laser Imaging has prepared images showing those.
Right, okay.
I'd like, if possible, to have a short break to allow Mr. De Giovanni to come in, and then we can allow you to see those images and comment on them.
Excuse me. It's 11, so we might as well just have the morning break, and then you can move on after that. Would that be convenient? Well, we'll have a break now for 15-20 minutes, and then we'll resume.
Thank you.
Ms. Greer.
Thank you. Constable Walker, you were very helpful yesterday and explained, we looked at images and you showed us positions from the minute you arrived. And Mr. De Giovanni from Advanced Laser Imaging has been preparing further 3D reconstruction images, and from the information you gave us yesterday in evidence. And I wonder, I've got 5 images to show you, and I wonder if I could ask you to look at these. You'll see that instead of the red circles, he's placed people or images into the scene. And I would just like to go over these with you just briefly and check that you're happy that they are a reasonable indication of what you said to us yesterday. So this first image, which is on the screen, you'll see the van. We heard your evidence yesterday about the van and the position, but this was, and this is an indication of where PC Peyton was, and Mr. Bio on Hayfield Road, and then you standing at the front of the van. Does that seem reasonable to you as a snapshot?
As a snapshot, yeah.
A snapshot, yes. You don't want to make any changes with that. You're happy with that?
If anything, I would say the distance between PC Payton and Mr. Bayou is a bit too much. I would probably say Mr. Bayou was closer to him at that point.
Right, okay, so a little bit closer.
Yeah.
Tell us when.
Yeah, a wee bit further. Probably about there.
About there. And you're happy with that representation? Is there anything else you want to change about that, the position of yourself or Mr. Bio or PC Peyton?
I would say I was closer to the front of the van.
Closer.
Yeah,
right.
because I sort of come round, almost touching the van as I came round the front of it.
Okay. That sort of area, or is that?
Yeah, that would be.
Are you happy with
Yeah,
that?
it's a
Because it can be moved again?
No, as I say, as a snapshot, as I'm coming round, then
As
that
a
would be.
snapshot. All right. Excellent. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to image 2. So again, this is a snapshot. This is, as we understand it, more akin to where PC Peyton was when he used his spray. So he's in that corner of the pavement at Hayfield Road. Oh. This happens to my computer all the time, so I'm sure it'll come back. I hope it'll come back. It was going so well, Mr. De Giovanni. Oh, thank you. No, I know, I bet they're here all along. Here it is. Yes. So this is the second image that we have, and this is an indication or a representation of the position that PC Peyton was in at the point he was about to use his spray. So does that seem a reasonable indication on the screen of the position that people were in at that moment?
I would say possibly they weren't maybe as far down the pavement as that at that point.
Right.
When the actual spray was deployed.
So
The distance between them is probably maybe accurate, but both of them must have got moved slightly further.
Back
Yeah.
along Hayfield Road?
Yeah.
Closer to...
No,
where
the other direction.
Oh, the other direction.
Yeah. And then move the same distance. Yeah.
And are you reasonably happy with that?
Yeah, I would say so.
We have a facility that allows us to see a line of sight from one of these characters, such as from yourself, PC Walker. Does that would be an indication of your sort of line of sight? Does that seem reasonably accurate to you? Or would you prefer to move your position as well?
No, I mean, as a snapshot, that's there or thereabouts.
Well,
Yeah.
that's great. Thank you very much. And so this will be image 3 loading up. So you gave evidence yesterday about when you used your spray and you talked about being at the front of your van and Mr. Bio coming towards you. And again, as a snapshot, as you look at the positions of the characters here, do you feel that's a reasonable indication?
Yes.
Are you happy, or do you want to move anybody?
I mean, as an indication as to where we ended up, I'm not 100% sure if that's the point at which I deployed the PAVA, but I probably couldn't be certain exactly where I was relative to the van when that happened, because my focus is obviously on Mr. Bayou. But yeah, we did end up close to that position at some point, yeah.
Thank you. That's excellent. And then we'll go on to the next one, please. Now, yesterday you spoke about after you'd been affected by the PAVA spray, you'd walked around to the driver's side of the van, and at some point PC Peyton was on your left.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you may want to adjust some of these positions. Can we start with you, PC Walker?
Yeah, I'm facing the wrong direction in that one.
Yeah, so I think yesterday you said you had your back to the driver's side
Yes.
of your van. So let's move you round. But I do recall, I think you said you were near the rear wheel. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
And
I'm still further round than at my back to the van.
you had your back
Back
to
against the van.
Okay.
And maybe
Right.
slightly closer to the van as well.
Closer to the
Yeah.
van. Is that a more reasonable indication?
To the
I think you
best of my
said, did
recollection,
you
yeah.
say you were crouched at that point? Or is that correct in the position it's
That depends
shown
at which point you're going to be referring to. I mean, at some point I've went from crouched at the front of the van to blinking to clearing my eyesight to becoming standing at that point.
So are you happy with that image as it is?
Yeah.
And then can you help adjust PC Peyton?
He would, I think he was facing more towards the van. Yep, and couched over, bent over at the waist.
Bent over at the waist. All right. So his head, was that quite close to the van, or was it touching the van?
He was further away from the van than I was. He would be at my sort of 10 or 11 o'clock position.
So you're standing with your back, or you're there with your back to the driver's side of the van,
Mhm.
but he was facing towards the driver's side of the van.
So I was- That could be wrong now, actually. If I'm
Right.
thinking about it, because he drew his baton and he handed it like that.
Mhm.
So he must have been facing the way he was originally. Sorry.
I think yesterday you did say that he'd drawn
He
the
drew
baton
it and then handed it, yeah.
handed it. So maybe on reflection, he was also with his back to the van. Was he closer to the front tyre or the door, or do you remember?
I don't know.
Okay.
Roughly about there.
Are you happy with that image as it is now?
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's move on to the last one.
My Lord, I wonder if I might briefly make an observation. Obviously, I'm not objecting to any of this. It's doubtless very helpful. The one thing that hasn't been taken account of in any of this is what PC Walker said about the position of the van. And as the van seems to be quite an important point of orientation, we can see from the Snapchat footage that the rear tyre of the van is on the dotted line. It's not in this picture, and I'm just wondering if account can be taken of that when we're looking at this, because otherwise, given how much focus is on the positioning of the van, everything is thrown out.
Graham,
Yes, I think I said at the outset when I was discussing it with Constable Walker that we had heard his evidence yesterday about the position of the van, and we will take account of that in relation to these images.
yes, very well. The point is noted, Mr. Dean of Faculty. Thank you.
A pleasure.
So this is the final image that I have for you today, Constable Walker, and again, it's been created relying on the red circles that you've provided us with. So what we have here is you'll see a blue person on the ground with the name PC Short.
Mhm.
Is that a reasonable indication of the position that you described earlier this morning, or would you wish to move that?
I think the Mr. Brian PC Short would be more towards the bottom lane. And so she started to take, when she was being, or appeared to have having been pushed, she was on the white line, so she'd have fell further down from there.
Right, so we'll move that southerly towards
Yeah.
the other pavement more.
Yeah, probably.
About there. Are you comfortable with that as a position
Yes.
on the screen? And you'll see that Mr. Bio's position is given to her right, standing, facing along Hayfield Road towards where you're standing.
Yes.
Are you comfortable with the position of Mr. Bio there?
To make it match my recollection, he would need to be turned counterclockwise slightly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And are you comfortable with that angle?
We moved my position in the other slide. So would that not be back closer
Yes.
to the rear of the van?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you if you want to move yourself.
Yeah.
So, and subject to the Dean of Faculty's comments about the van position. So when you say you were at the rear of the van, do you still mean the driver's side towards the rear wheel?
Yes, yes.
So really where you had been positioned in the previous slide,
Mhm.
previous image. Right. Do you want to change the position of yourself, Constable Walker? You're now at the rear wheel of the driver's side. Do you want to change your position, or are you content that you were facing towards Mr. Bile and PC Short?
My head was facing that way. I wouldn't say my whole body was, but
Right.
if it's as a representation, so
So your body remained, your back was
Yeah,
towards the van,
turn my head
but
back
you'd
and forward in
turned your
both
head.
directions. Yeah.
So I don't think there's that level of detail
Detail.
available in the images. And are you subject to that alteration and the comments regarding the van itself?
Mhm.
Are you comfortable that the position that Mr. Bio and PC Short are in on this image is a reasonable indication of where they were when you saw them?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a couple of things you said this morning that I'd like to confirm with you before we move on from this section.
Mhm.
You've described how you were kneeling during the restraint, and you also described how you were lying on the ground. And I'm wondering if you can explain how you came from the kneeling position to you demonstrated it kneeling, leaning over,
Mhm.
and then how you came from that position to move into the lying on the ground position.
I was probably in loads of different positions whilst we were doing that restraint. I've probably moved round. Everybody's moved round at that point. And that was probably a result of trying to get Mr. Bio's hand out from underneath him. But yeah, I mean, we've probably changed for that position again after that.
But your weight would still be on your knees as you moved?
Yes, you can see that. I mean, even when I'm lying there, 3/4 of my body's on the pavement.
And then in your perk statement, you'd referred to shoulder charging with your left shoulder, but I understood that the demonstration that you gave us and the indication in the chair was with your right shoulder. Can I just be clear which shoulder you used to shoulder charge Mr. Bile?
In my initial perk statement, I said
Yes.
left shoulder.
In the perk statement, not the self-penned one, it was the... Sorry, I don't have the number, I can find it. Do you have a copy of it? Oh, no, sorry, this is which one? Sorry, this is the perk statement. His perk statement? Yeah, give me the perk statement. I'll read it out. I think we've got it on the list. So it's 264, perk 264. Yeah. Right, and we're looking at page 7, and it's the second paragraph. Right, 7, second paragraph, and you'll see in the middle of that paragraph it says, "So I just brought my left arm across my body and shoulder charged him with my left shoulder with a fair bit of force." I think I'd read that out before I spoke to you about that. You see, that's left shoulder, but when you demonstrated it to me, I think you indicated you're right, and I just want to be clear which shoulder you used.
I would go with obviously the statement that was supplied at the time because it would be fresher in my memory. But certainly if they were to ask me, I'm right-handed, so I would normally always go on with my right shoulder. So that's probably why I demonstrated it like that. But that statement's fresher, or was fresher at the time.
So which version would you prefer? Should the chair prefer the fresher version, or the fact that you normally lead with your right?
I would obviously go with the statement that was produced at the time. So with the same movement but mirrored.
Okay. So the same movement but leading with your left?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask you something about, we've not heard evidence from PC Good yet. But the chair has access to a statement she gave to PERC on the 4th of June 2015 about the restraint. And I'd like to read out part of that and ask you if you would like to comment on it. And she describes that during the restraint that in relation to Mr. Bio, his arms and legs were kicking out, fleeing, trying to force himself up using his arms like a press-up. Several officers were trying to restrain him by pushing him to the ground. Now, as I say, we've not heard from PC Good, but a press-up to me is where someone's pushing their hands on the ground. So they're face down and they're using their hands on the ground to press up and push their back up. And I just wondered, did you have any comment on that description about Mr. Bio trying to do a press-up?
No, like I said, he was never round onto his front or be able to put both hands flat on the ground. And from, obviously from my knowledge of the incident now, PC Good were approached from the hospital end off Hayfield Road. So I don't think she would have had a clear view of what was happening with his upper body, but that's something that you'll need to confirm with her.
Yes, we've not heard from
yes.
her yet. All right, thank you. Right, I'd like to move away from the events of Hayfield Road and ask you some other questions. I'd like to ask you about leg restraints, if I may. And can we look at Use of Force Sop, PS 10933? And I'd like to look at paragraph 20.5, please. Now, you've mentioned that leg restraints were used, but as I understand it, you didn't really see what was happening at that end.
No, I had nothing to do with the leg restraints.
Okay. Well, can I just ask you to comment on the Use of Force SOP, please? Paragraph 20.5. Ideally, the leg restraints need at least 2 police officers or staff working together to correctly apply them. The subject should be handcuffed to the rear and placed in the prone, lying face down position before the leg restraints are applied. So were you aware of any officers asking you to place Mr. Bio in the prone position in order that they could apply the leg restraints?
No.
All right. When did you notice, sorry, I should have asked this, when did you notice that Mr. Bio had stopped struggling and become unconscious? I can show you the spreadsheet. So if you look at page 7 of the spreadsheet, you'll see that there's an entry, an airwaves transmission by PC Alan Smith at 7:25:17. Have you got page 7?
Yes, I do.
And he says, Roger, this male now certainly appears to be unconscious, breathing, not responsive, get an ambulance for him. When was it you noticed that he was unconscious? So he'd stopped struggling and become unconscious?
It would be about the same time because the 3 of us, Alan Smith, Alan Payton and myself, sort of all raised at the same time that the male had appeared to sort of become unconscious at that point and unresponsive.
And at that moment, when you noticed that, what position was Sheku Bio in?
He was on, at that point he'd be on his back.
Okay. And then staying with this use of force SOP, which is on the screen, I wonder if we can look at paragraph 4.6. And this is further up, it should be headed, it relates to profiled offender behaviour. 4.6, and there you'll see it's headed up profiled offender behaviour, and it says profiling person's behaviour may assist in determining an officer's reasonable response. Profiled offender behaviour can be subcategorised. And then we've got level 1 compliance. Most people dealt with are reasonable and will comply with any lawful instruction. This compliance may be verbal or it may be active compliance, such as stopping an action when told. And can I confirm with you, nothing you've described in relation to Mr. Bio at Hayfield Road would have come within this level? There wasn't compliance with your instructions?
Yes, correct.
And then level 2, verbal resistance and or gestures. This includes shouting, swearing and verbal challenges to requests and or instructions given. It normally includes non-verbal gestures and posturing, body language, and can consist of warning and danger signs of potential attack. We looked at those warning and danger signs yesterday. But again, nothing in that description of level 2 would apply to the way things were at Hayfield Road.
At what stage?
At the beginning. Mr. Bio wasn't shouting, he wasn't swearing, he wasn't making verbal challenges to your requests, and in terms of non-verbal gestures and posturing, there was no warning or danger signs. Please say if you disagree with that.
It's no that I disagree. It's you've got to be careful how you're applying this, because it was a dynamic. His attitude and behaviour changed throughout. So it's not just a case he's a level 2 and he stays a level 2.
No. I'm just saying at the beginning there was nothing, there were no shouting or swearing when you arrived at Hayfield Road. In fact, at any time, I don't think you've said there was any shouting or swearing by
No.
Mr. Bio.
That's correct.
Right. And then level 3, passive resistance. This is a typical tactic used, but not exclusively by demonstrators. It's best described as non-active conduct with no compliance to lawful instruction. And when would you say that Mr. Bio started to demonstrate level 3, passive resistance?
Would be when PC Payton approached him and asked him to stay where he was, stop, and gave the clear lawful orders.
And then level 4, active resistance. This is more of a physical form of resistance in that the subject is actively doing something to prevent or obstruct an officer from carrying out their duty. This type of resistance, although physical by nature, falls short of an assault upon another. It can include holding on to an object or person either physically or mechanically, struggling to break free from an officer's grasp, trying to dispose of evidence. When would Sheku Bio have demonstrated this level of active resistance?
When he was walking towards PC Payton, refusing to stop and closing down the reaction gap for him.
And then level 5, assaultive resistance. This is when there is a deliberate intention by another to cause a physical effect upon a person, either directly or by indirect means. Assault by menaces. It can be caused by an individual or by a group of people acting together. When would he have demonstrated this level of resistance, assaultive resistance?
When he started to chase PC Short.
And then level 6, if we could move on to that. Serious aggravated assaultive resistance. The highest level of resistance encountered, which generally involves the intended use of weapons as part of the attack, where the perceived threat is that of serious injury or is life-threatening. It can also include situations without the presence of weapons, where the perceived threat is that of serious injury or is life-threatening. The above provides a rising scale of resistance, An offender may display a combination of these types of behaviour and may start at any level. They may escalate through the levels. Similarly, they may de-escalate their levels of resistance, and any force used by an officer or staff must be proportionate and appropriate to the perceived resistance in combination with the impact factors present at that time. So when we look at level 6, serious aggravated assaultive resistance, when would Mr. Bio have achieved that level?
When he struck PC shorthand, knocked her to the ground.
Right. So he reaches this level 6 when he strikes her, knocks her to the ground, and then you've described a stomp.
The stamp on
A
top
stamp.
of that, yes.
Sorry. Thank you. And then can we look at 4.7, please? Officers' reasonable response, force options. By combining the elements of profiled offender behaviour and impact factors, it affords the officer staff the ability to quickly assess the threat and to make an informed decision to adopt appropriate tactics from a range of force options in order to deal with the situation in a controlled, justifiable and accountable manner. These responses or force options can be categorised. Level 1, officer presence. This is a broad term encompassing the physical and psychological aspects of an officer, especially in uniform or other specialist equipment, having a visual impact and effect on the mind or will of another merely by attending to or arriving at the situation. Adopting a professional approach and conduct can enhance this. So this level 1 of officer response is that turning up in your uniform?
Uniform, fully marked van,
looking
blue lights.
impressive with equipment and your van and things. Right. And then level 2, please. Tactical communications. So this is a step up from just turning up with all your equipment.
Mm-hmm.
By definition, tactical communication means the ability to give out and take in information in a way which gives the officer a tactical advantage. It incorporates verbal and non-verbal communication skills and is the ability of an individual to effectively use all forms of communication within reason to resolve an identified area of conflict. This level could include giving specific direction, commands and/or instructions to an offender, even in a forceful, vocal manner. And so tactical communications, it says verbal and non-verbal communication skills. Mm-hmm. Now yesterday you were talking about communicating by a hand gesture, so not even any words said, but the hand gesture which you said would communicate that you want the person to stop.
Yes.
Is that the type of thing that's also included in this?
Yes, I would say so.
Right. And then level 3, control skills. This is the lowest level of physical use of force. So where there is some form of restraint applied to an offender, this may be as little as placing a hand on an offender, applying hold and restraint techniques, up to and including various handcuffing techniques and the use of leg restraints. So level 3 control skills, is this the first part where force is actually incorporated into your level, your response?
Yes, I would say so.
Right. And it could include the lowest level of force being something like touching the person in some way. Mm-hmm. Or it could be more than that. And it talks about hold and restraint techniques. Is that the techniques you mentioned yesterday that you're taught in OST training?
Yes, I mean that varies from come along hold, where you've got a hold of somebody's hand to escort them along, to if they become resistive at that point, into ground pins, etc. But yeah, we cover all of that.
Thank you. And then level 4, defensive tactics. These tactics are generally perceived to be strikes, whether delivered by means of empty hand techniques or baton strikes, but also include the more robust defensive handcuffing techniques and the use of CS incapacitant spray. So this seems to be a level up from level 3, and it's called defensive tactics. And how do you see this as differing?
That's when a case of somebody's fighting back against the initial restraint. So you feel somebody resisting against you, you put them into a ground pin, you get handcuffs on, that's it. Or if you get somebody into a ground pin and then they try and break free or or they start at a higher level, then they just come along hold, and that's where you've got to start to use your PP equipment and strike back.
And what's a ground pin?
It's just an OST technique where you get somebody lying on the ground and you use your hand to pin in against the shoulder and pin them to the ground, and then you could go from that to applying handcuffs.
It's an empty hand technique that allows you to then apply handcuffs to somebody.
Yes.
Right, thank you. And this level 4 defensive tactics would also include the CS spray.
Yes.
And then there's mention of specialist operations and police dogs and firearms officers and tasers in that section as well.
Yep.
And then level 5, deadly or lethal force. This is a level of force that has the potential to cause serious injury or even death when it is applied. It may, in certain circumstances where there is a serious risk of severe injury or life-threatening risk, be a deliberate choice of option, but in all circumstances must be proportionate to the perceived threat and degree of imminent danger. If this is the chosen option, there must be a high degree of jeopardy involved, i.e. the subject has the means, ability, opportunity, and is displaying intent to cause serious injury or kill. All elements of jeopardy must be present immediately at the time that lethal force is applied. Officers using empty hand strikes, baton strikes, as well as authorised firearms officers' use of conventional firearms could potentially deliver lethal force. So the empty hand strikes, the baton strikes, or the firearms officers could deliver lethal force. So this seems to be the highest level.
Yes.
So there's 6 levels of resistance and 5 levels of response by officers. So they're not mirror images of. It's not a simple tick box exercise where you lead one to the other.
Yeah.
Right. Can you tell us when you used your spray, what level of force were you using? If you want, we'll move down and.
No, that would be the defensive.
The defensive.
Yes.
And then when you shoulder charged,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Bio, what level of force were you using?
Defensive, I would say at that point.
Still defensive. And then when you were restraining him, what level of force were you using in response?
It went from defensive when he was lashing out to when we got control of him to putting handcuffs and that on to whatever level 3 is, I think.
It went to level 3.
The control skills, yeah.
So as far as you're concerned, you were never using level 5? Do you want to
No.
see that on the screen again, please, just so that we can look at it?
No, I would say I never went to the level of force with the potential to cause serious injury or death.
So you don't
Just by
think...
shoulder charging, no.
No. When you were during the restraint, I was asking about.
No, I said that was defensive. He was punching out at me, I was punching out at him. We were trying to just get control of him, and then once we had control of him, it went down to the level 3.
Thank you. Right, I'd like to ask about after the restraint and the moment where they're calling for an ambulance. So could we look at paragraph 76 of your statement, please? And you were asked to look at a photograph when you did your statement, and I wonder if we can see that on the screen, please. This is PERC 03374. And you'll see that this is a photograph or an image that's been captured, and there's a number of officers identified there. And we may hear in due course from Samantha Davidson that she's the one who wrote the names on.
Right, okay.
And would you look at this, and you'll see that slightly right of centre of that photograph, it says PC Walker. Do you agree that that is you?
Yes.
Do you recognise any of the other officers in the photograph?
I would agree with D.S. Davidson.
Would you mind pointing to them while
Yep.
you speak?
So D.S. Davidson, Alan Payton, Alan Smith, and confident to say that that's Ash.
It says, the line to that person says PCA Tomlinson. It's at the bottom of the page.
My initial thought was that was Daniel Gibson.
So you're not sure
So
about
I'm not
that
sure
one.
about that one, no.
And then in the distance, there's someone called DC Connell with a blue jacket on.
Mm-hmm.
Did you recognise him?
Yeah, he's not clear enough in that, but
Right. Okay, thank you very much. And after the restraint, can I ask you about the spreadsheet, please? And there's an entry at 7:24 and 28 seconds. So it's page 7 of the spreadsheet, and it's towards the top. 7:24:28. And it's the second entry involving Acting Police Sergeant Scott Maxwell. So this is at the end of phase 4. And just before, there's a request to get an ambulance for Mr. Bio. And Acting Police Sergeant Scott Maxwell says, although there's no visible injuries to PC Short, she's been stomped to the body a few times, etc., and struck to the head. Can see if the ambulance can attend ASAP. I'm wondering if you could help me. We may hear that Acting Police Sergeant Maxwell wasn't present in Hayfield Road at the time you've described the stamp on PC Short. Who provided that information to him? I'm wondering, was that you or someone else?
No, that wasn't me at that point.
It wasn't. And then can we look at another airwave transmission by Acting Police Sergeant Maxwell? And it's on the next page, page 8. And it's 7:26:52. And it starts just for the log. Do you see that one?
Yes.
Just for the log, the initial on attendance, this male's attacked PC Short quite violently. As a result, he was sprayed with CS and Pava and battened. There may be a suggestion that he has been battened to the head area, 4-1 over. So the suggestion from that transmission is that the first thing that happened was Sheku Bayo attacked PC Short and then was sprayed. But can I confirm with you that your evidence is that he was sprayed prior to that happening with PC Short?
Yes, that's correct. He was sprayed with Pava and then, sprayed with CS, then Pava, and then the assault on PC Short took place.
So the information that Scott Maxwell has given over the airwaves transmission there is not correct?
It's probably to the best of his knowledge, given the fact that he's just turned up and been picking up bits and pieces.
He's picked that up from someone else. He's not got that from you.
No.
So he's picked it up from somewhere else and transmitted it, but that version is not a correct version.
No, it's not as per...
Not as per your evidence.
Not by my recollection.
Thank you. Can I ask you about paragraph 70, please, of your...
Sorry, what paragraph?
Paragraph 70,
Yep.
please. We'll get that on the screen. And you've said you were the first officer to perform chest compressions on Mr. Bio when it became apparent that he was unresponsive and not breathing. I placed interlocked hands on the centre of the chest and started compressions in line with the training I've had. After 2 or 3 compressions, I heard the sound of a rib breaking in the chest area. In my training, I was told if you were doing it right, you might break a rib. So you were the first officer to help do the CPR.
Yes.
And at that point, Mr. Bai was on his back.
Yes.
And you were applying those compressions to his chest area.
Yes.
And you've said that you heard a rib fracture in that area during that time.
Yes.
Were you able to discern at that stage the area where the rib fracture was?
No.
Where on his chest were you applying compressions? Could you-
Just in line with the nipples is where you're supposed to do it on
Right.
the sternum.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask you, in your self-penned statement that you prepared, have it before you if you wish, I don't see any mention of the rib fracture in that statement. But in your PERC statement, which you gave on the 4th of June, it is mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder if you can help the chair understand why there's that difference.
Probably because the PERC asked obviously a lot more questions. So I probably just said I started, or in my own statement that I started CPR. And they've probably probed that a bit further as to, well, kind of what happened and all the rest of it. It would be my only explanation.
When did you become aware that there was a rib fracture?
That would be when the results of the post-mortem become public knowledge and was published in the press, and there was mention of his multiple injuries, including a rib fracture.
Do you remember when that was?
I don't know.
So the information came to you from an entry in the media or the
Yes.
press. Was it a newspaper or was it some other form of media?
It would be the news. It would either be online or on the TV or...
But that's something that you noticed.
yes.
Do you remember if that was before you gave your statement to PERC on the 4th of June 2015 or after?
I think it would be after, but I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know with the dates.
You're not sure about that?
No. But it certainly did influence the statement that I provided.
Okay. Can I ask you to look at paragraph 77, please? It's still on the same page. And then you say there, I've been asked whether any senior officer spoke to me or PC Peyton prior to leaving the scene. I can only recall speaking to DS Davidson, who instructed we return to the office and we would regroup there. DS Samantha Davidson also told us to take her police van back to the office. So you were to take her police van back to the office, is that right?
No, not a typo. It was to take our police van back to the
Right.
office.
Okay. So you were still in the same van that you'd arrived in, and you went back to Kirkcaldy Police Office in your own van.
Yes, and the same Ford Transit van. That was
Thank
done
you. So that we can make that correction for you.
Thank you.
And in relation to officers speaking to you prior to leaving the scene, the chair may hear evidence from Inspector Kay, Stephen Kay, and he will maybe tell us that he spoke to our Acting Police Sergeant Maxwell and told him not to allow the officers to discuss the ins and outs of the case. And we may hear from Acting Police Sergeant Maxwell that he spoke to you and PC Peyton in the custody van. So that's your van.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point you said you wouldn't be speaking to anyone or giving a statement until you'd spoken to your Federation rep. Do you remember Acting Police Sergeant Maxwell telling you at the custody van or before you left the scene that officers shouldn't be discussing the ins and outs of what had happened?
No, I've got no recollection of that.
And then, can I ask you, when you got back to Kirkcaldy Police Office, who was in charge at that stage?
Upon still arriving back at the station, it would still be APS Maxwell as far as we were concerned.
Thank you. Right. Do you remember getting any instructions when you went back to Kirkcaldy Police Office not to discuss the incident? In your PERC statement 264, you said specifically D.I. Robson didn't tell us not to discuss the incident, but I'm wondering about any other instructions you may remember.
I can't remember much of what happened when we got back to the canteen. It was, I mean, there was people came in and out, gave us updates, or no updates, but let us know what was happening, or that they were going to go into meetings to find out what was going to be happening. But I can't recall any specific message that was passed. I can't recall the context of it.
How were you feeling at that time when you got back to the police office?
Concerned for the well-being of the gentleman. Obviously nobody wants to be involved in an incident like this. Concerned at the nature of the call and what we'd been involved in. And then obviously just wondering what was going to be happening. What is the process now for, or obviously initially we were concerned it was going to be a death in custody. And then obviously none of us were really aware of what the process would be after that. What do we need to do? And as I say, people were coming in saying, well, we're away to meetings to find out what's going to happen. We'll get back to you. So it just turned into a bit of
Had you ever been
game.
involved in anything like this before?
No.
And you didn't understand what procedure would be followed?
Yes.
When do you feel you received sufficient information to help you understand what the procedure would be?
Not that day, at any point.
So when?
I lost track of the days afterwards, but I would say the first time I had a true, I think what needs to be appreciated is the next day when I came in, I basically left the office and went on sick leave. So I didn't have a lot of contact with the office and that at that time. So it was a case of I was waiting on somebody coming to take my statement from me. And it wasn't until I got a phone call asking me to attend at the police station, the police college to provide a statement.
How long were you on sick leave?
It was 6 months from the incident.
And you were expecting a call from someone to ask you for a statement?
Yes, I mean I was coming in and out of the station as they were requiring me to come in for updates and for trim and things like that. But yeah, it was basically, I'll try and find the exact the way it worked. But when we left that day, it was, you will get the park will be in contact with you via Conrad Trickett, and they will arrange a statement to be noted from you. And then it was just every time you went in, it was nobody was really sure what was happening, and it was a waiting game until eventually the first definitive answer I got was, please attend the police college and note a statement, and we'll get a statement noted from you by the park.
Do you remember if Trickett got in touch with you?
He never did, no.
He never did. How did you then find out that PERC wanted to take a statement from you?
I received a telephone call from the Federation lawyer who was working on, who had been appointed to me by the Police Federation, asking if I was free.
Who was that?
It was someone from Peter Watson's
Right.
office.
And so you've said that Constable Trickett never got in touch with you. Can I ask you about a couple of things? We've mentioned D.I. Robson, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be evidence available to the chair that he says he spoke to the officers in the canteen after you went back to Kirkcaldy Police Office and requested that they not actively discuss the incident at this time, just relax, watch TV and have a cup of tea or coffee. Now, in your PERC statement, you said Robson did not tell us not to discuss the incident. Can I be clear? Are you saying he did not say that, or you just don't remember?
I don't recall being told that.
You don't recall.
Yeah.
And then, if there's a suggestion that Inspector K spoke to officers in the canteen and said that to protect the integrity of the inquiry and officer welfare, he told officers of the pitfalls of discussing the incident and highlighting the anticipated media attention, that he said you were not under suspicion for any offences and you were to utilise the canteen area as respite, and he would bar other officers access to the canteen to offer privacy. Do you remember him telling the officers, including yourself, that information?
That we had exclusive use of the canteen, yes. But again, I can't remember the exact ins and outs of what he said.
Okay. And if there's evidence available to the chair that Conrad Trickett, who was I understand, the post-incident manager, said there was no need, he'd told officers no need to talk about the incident amongst themselves, made clear they shouldn't speak to each other about the incident or their involvement in it. And he arrived at Kirkcaldy Police Office as post-incident manager and spoke at the first meeting. So it'd be sometime around 11:30 that morning. Do you remember him sharing that information with you?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yes.
And what I've said, is that what he told you?
Again, can't remember exactly, but yeah, it was they were introducing it as a post-incident management, which was something that I'd never partaken in before, and that along the lines of that we shouldn't really be talking to each other about the incident, and he was here to make sure that if there was anything that would be noted down, and he had a book that was basically keeping a track of anything that was my understanding, that he would be keeping a track of anything that was said or not said. Or
did he remain with you for the rest of the day?
Yes.
And as far as you know, he had a book to note things down? So up until around, if we take it for the moment, it was around 11:30 or sometime shortly after that he arrived. Did you discuss the incident before he arrived?
There was discussion about the incident, as in like the injuries to Nicole and kind of why Pava didn't work, because I was under the impression that Pava worked on most people. But as to the actual what happened and who done what, there was no discussion in relation to that.
And after Conrad Trickett spoke to you in the morning, was there any conversation after that period?
No.
About what had happened?
No, there was no real conversation about the actual incident. It was just stuff that was associated to the incident, if that makes sense. That was no.
What do you mean?
Like I say, again, I thought Pava worked on everybody. I thought that was the case, and why did it not work on this? So it is kind of connected to that slightly, but it wasn't, I sprayed him with the Pava, and this was his reaction, and this is what happened. And did you see him doing that? Did you see this happening?
Did you tell people what you'd done?
Yes, the spray didn't work on him, and at that point I was concerned. Again, this is the overlap between the welfare issue, where you're sitting down and dealing with the trauma that you've just been through as a team, and trying to still be professional and know.
So you told people that you'd sprayed him with your Pava?
Mm-hmm.
And did PC Payton tell people that he'd sprayed them with his CS spray?
I mean, I don't know if it's a case he told people, because everybody was aware that he was under the effects of his CS spray.
Still at that point in the canteen?
Yeah, aye, because it gives you the CS spray. If you move about it's on your clothing, that could go back up into the cloud again, and so aye, and he still had red and sore eyes. In relation to my pava, I mean that was brought back to the office and it was lying on the canteen table. So everybody knew that the pava had been discharged. That was on the table, along with my handcuffs and my radio.
And did PC Tomlinson tell people what he'd done?
Yes, aye.
And what about the other officers? PC Smith?
No, there wasn't a lot of discussion. As I say, the only reason that I think PC Tomlinson was he became quite upset because of the baton strike that he'd put in, and that was, as I say, trying to get the balance between welfare.
Where was he upset? Was that just in the canteen or before then?
That was before then. When we first arrived back, we were in the writing room in Kirkcaldy Police Station.
And why was he upset?
Just because of the circumstances that he'd put in the baton strike, and then potentially the male was or appeared to be dying or dead.
And did he remain upset in the canteen?
No, not throughout the day. He managed to got the initial concern, I think, out of the way, and then we'll just see what's going to happen. We'll see what the next step is. We'll see what the process is, and we'll just take it from there.
Okay. You talked about the officers in the canteen, and you've talked about the discussions you've had. Did you leave the canteen during that day?
Yes.
And what sort of areas did you go?
I went in the backyard to make a telephone call, which is just outside the canteen. I went to the custody area to get cups so that people could get refreshments. And in order to hand over my equipment, I had to go back upstairs to change the locker rooms to retrieve my equipment at the end of the day to hand that over.
Did you speak to other officers when you were out of the canteen?
In the canteen, in the custody area, yes, somebody asked about the welfare for Nicole, if we'd had an update as to how she was.
Do you remember who that was?
That would be Constable Geddes.
Brian Geddes?
Brian Geddes, yes.
And so you had a conversation with him?
Yes, because he's part of our team, but he was seconded that day to work in the custody to backfill for short staff. So yeah, he's obviously part of the team. If he'd been working that day, he could have been at that call, and he was just concerned for his colleagues. So he was just asking for what Nicole's injuries were and if she was okay.
Explain why you were in the custody area.
It was to get cups.
Cups for your coffee?
Yes, polystyrene cups. I was also custody trained at that time, so I knew where the cups were.
Why weren't there cups in the canteen?
The canteen is a place for eating. There is, it's not well stocked.
Are there staff there serving
no,
food?
No. It's a kitchen as opposed to a canteen. Right. But aye, there's days where you would need to share the shift fork. It wasn't well stocked.
Okay. You mentioned there's a backyard just outside the canteen. Is there a doorway between the canteen and the backyard?
Yeah, there'd be two sets of doors.
Two doors?
Yeah.
One in, one out, or just different areas?
No, different areas. So you come out the canteen, that takes you into the main corridor, and then at the bottom of the corridor you go out to the main yard.
People coming in from the backyard, can they get into the canteen from that area then, from that door?
They would come in that door, but they would then need to go through the canteen doors to enter, and that's where there were signs up saying no staff allowed in there.
So who put the signs up?
I don't know who done it, but it was organised, I think, by Inspector K. I don't know who ultimately got into.
When did they get put up?
Pass. time-wise pass.
Up until the signs went up, were people just walking into the canteen freely?
I wouldn't say walking into the canteen. It's a through road into custody. So I think at one point one of the custody officers came in that door and walked through to get into the custody area. But I was shortly after that. It was nobody was allowed to come in.
Could I ask you to look at paragraph 84 of your statement, please? And you say you were waiting on a senior person to decide on a course of action, and let me just see. So it's line 3, or start with line 2. The impression at the end of line 2 I was left with when we were asked to wait in the canteen was that we were awaiting on someone senior to decide on the course of action and tell us what was expected of us. This didn't happen at all until 4 o'clock, when we were told that our clothing and equipment was being seized for forensic examination. Up until that point, we were not asked to give statements, fill in any paperwork, or asked not to discuss what happened. Now, it then goes on to say the canteen area was being treated as a welfare area for the officers involved. We all mingled together and left items of uniform lying about. In light of what we've said about Conrad Trickett, the post-incident manager, and your recollection of him speaking, do you want to amend that part of your statement to paragraph 84, that we were awaiting on someone senior to decide on the course of action and to tell us what was expected of us? This didn't happen at all until 4 p.m.
Yeah.
But Conrad Trickett had spoken to you. He was the post-incident manager prior to 4 p.m., hadn't he? So when you say it didn't happen, do you want to amend that or explain it in a little bit more detail? Who told you the equipment was being seized?
I think someone came in to the canteen to tell us that would be happening.
Do you remember who that was?
No.
Was that at 4 o'clock, as you say in this statement?
It might have been just before then.
Right. So between Trickett speaking to you and this thing round about 4 o'clock, do you remember which senior officers spoke to you during the course of the day, if any?
I could remember, it was that long ago now, Colin Robson, Stephen Kay, and there was, I think it was maybe a female super, whose name I can't remember, but she came through to tell us that she was going to a gold meeting and she'll get back to us with some information as to what was happening next.
All right. Do you remember what those senior officers said to you? What did Kay say to you?
I honestly can't remember.
Can't remember. Let's move on then. Still in paragraph 84, you talk about you mingled together and left items of uniform lying about. Can I also ask you to look at 2 other paragraphs, 91 and 93? We'll start with 91.
Yes.
When I returned to Kirkcaldy Police Office, my stab vest and equipment was placed on the floor within the canteen. I continued to wear my uniform until it was seized at the end of the day. And then 93, when I initially returned to Kirkcaldy Police Office, none of my equipment was initially recovered. At the end of the day, my clothing and all PPE, including baton, was taken by me to a designated office and forensically seized by other officers. I do not know who I gave this equipment to. I would describe them as 2 officers in full forensic suits. I believe all other officers' equipment was also seized at the end of the shift. So there was a process whereby all the officers' equipment was seized at the end of the shift.
Yes.
But up until then, it was in the canteen with everyone. And you've described at paragraph 84, you left items of uniform lying about. And we can go back up to 84 if
Yeah,
that's all right to let you see that. That's the last sentence there. And was that the same for everyone?
Yes.
Right. When you said you left items of uniform lying about, did that include your high-vis vest and your stab vest, so sort of black body armour and the high-vis?
I believe it would have been, but I'm also aware that in a previous statement I've said I left it upstairs when I first arrived. So
what's your best recollection now?
my best recollection would be, and it makes more sense because we went upstairs first of all, as it well we would have been left upstairs at that point, and then we went downstairs.
So yours was left upstairs?
I would be happy to go with the initial statement which says it was upstairs, because that also fits in with the chain of events that day where we went back upstairs first of all.
And is that your recollection now, that you left it upstairs when you arrived back?
I have no recollection of where it was. Just the fact that we were in the canteen and I had my uniform on, minus my stab vest, and just almost assumed that because I was in the canteen without my vest would have been beside everybody else's.
So everyone else's vests were lying about?
Yeah, people's equipment's wherever people had taken it off that day.
Right. And you said you wore your uniform. Is that essentially what you're wearing now?
Yes, yes.
Without the body armour and the high-vis?
Yeah.
And is that what you were wearing in the cell, the custody area?
Yes.
And can I ask, apart from the comments of other people coming in, senior officers, were there any other members of staff who were coming in and out of the canteen that day? Do you remember?
Like I say, I think initially one person who was attending for his work walked through the canteen and sort of realised that there was maybe something ongoing and quickly exited the canteen towards the custody area.
He's the person you remember?
Yeah.
Apart from that, you don't remember anyone else?
Who wasn't involved with us coming or going? No, I wouldn't think, no.
Okay. Can I ask you when PC Short came back to Kirkcaldy Police Office?
Mm-hmm. Oh, the time, sorry.
What time, sorry?
No, again, I wasn't keeping track of the time that day. I've no idea what time it was she came back.
Do you have a sense of how long it was after you returned that she came back?
It was, we'd been upstairs, back down to the canteen, so it was a while after us, but no, it wouldn't be as far as like 4 hours or anything like that. It was after us.
What was she wearing when she came back?
I can't remember. I could just remember her sitting on the sofa in her blacks, the same as everybody else.
All right. Could you just give me a moment, please, Constable? Thank you very much. I'm not completed yet, but I'm conscious of the time.
No, we'll stop for lunch then, and sit down at 2 o'clock.
Thank you.